Bianca, my sister-in-law, always boasted about being a straightforward, tomboyish woman. When my boyfriend and I were preparing for our wedding, Bianca feigned surprise and loudly asked, "Didn't you say your boyfriend was quick to finish? If he can't satisfy you, why are you even getting married?" I was so embarrassed that my face turned red, and I pulled Ethan away. After I gave birth, she took my child to my ex-boyfriend, and in front of everyone she shouted, "Look, doesn't this child look like you?" Later, my child was diagnosed with leukemia. My husband and I were running around everywhere searching for a matching bone marrow donor, but she told my child, "Your parents don't want you anymore, they have a new baby. And nobody likes a sick child." My child cried nonstop and passed away due to acute pneumonia. My husband and I died in a car accident on our way back home. When I opened my eyes again, I was back when Ethan and I were preparing for our wedding. "Didn't you say your boyfriend was quick to finish? If he can't satisfy you, why are you even getting married?" Hearing this sentence, I knew I had been reborn. Opening my aching eyes, I saw Bianca standing at the door with her arms akimbo, her eyes full of hostility. When she realized the atmosphere was wrong, she suddenly covered her mouth. "Oh, Clara, don't blame me for speaking so bluntly. You know I'm just a straight-talking person and don't think before I speak. Actually, I mean well." My father coughed lightly, trying to smooth things over. Yes, your sister-in-law is just a softie at heart despite her sharp tongue. She actually cares about you." I raised my hand, interrupting my father. I looked at Bianca, my eyes cold as ice, and a wave of immense hatred surged within me, almost burning away my reason. I laughed, my smile icy and mocking. "When did I ever tell you my boyfriend was bad in bed? Or did you personally try my boyfriend to find out he's no good?" Before Ethan could even speak, my brother Dominic blocked him with a kick. "Clara, what are you saying?" Watching Bianca hiding behind my brother, looking all wronged, I hesitantly fiddled with my fingers. "I'm just asking my sister-in-law after all. I've never said my boyfriend isn't good enough. So how did she know?" I glanced playfully at Dominic. "Come to think of it, you two have been married for so many years, but Bianca's belly still seems to be quiet. Could it be that you—" As soon as these words came out, my parents' eyes towards Dominic instantly changed. Dominic's face turned red as he stood up. "What nonsense are you talking about? How could I have erectile dysfunction? Are you cursing me, you brat?" I retreated slightly, my shoulder held firmly by Ethan. I took a deep breath, reassuringly patted Ethan's hand, then turned to face my cold-faced parents. "We are all adults. I don't believe you can't tell what Bianca meant. Is it right to hurt your family members for an outsider?" The word outsider deeply hurt Bianca. She couldn't help but cover her face and sob, hitting her own stomach. "I knew you all treated me like an outsider. Just because I haven't given you a child." My mother took 2 steps forward to stop her. "Clara is being unreasonable, don't you know better? If you injure your stomach you won't be able to conceive, and the Sue family line will end." I watched Bianca stop sobbing and sneered. I turned and rushed back to my room, packed my luggage and left, throwing a sentence behind me. The moment the door slammed shut, my father's roar came. "If you dare leave, don't come back. When you and Ethan are starving in the cold, I won't help you. Clara, think this through." Outside the door, my footsteps faltered as I pulled Ethan out of the apartment building. Then, to Ethan's surprise, I turned back, slowly raised my hand towards the still trembling door, and flipped it the middle finger. The day Ethan and I got our marriage certificate, Bianca just happened to see us. She, never one to shy away from a spectacle, snatched our pre-marriage medical reports. Claiming she was doing it for my own good, she posted both of our reports in the family group chat. "Here are Clara and her boyfriend's medical reports. Take a look to see if there's anything wrong with this man. I wouldn't want our Clara to marry a man with erectile dysfunction." I rolled my eyes, grabbing the reports from Bianca's hand. Then, with lightning speed, I snapped pictures of her and Dominic's reports and sent them into the group chat. "Here are my sister-in-law and my brother's medical reports. Take a look to see if there's anything wrong with my brother. I don't want my sister-in-law to spend her life with a man with erectile dysfunction." After sending it, I returned the reports to an enraged Bianca, mimicking her words. "I'm just a softie at heart despite my sharp tongue. I was just being direct." You wouldn't blame me, right, sister-in-law? Bianca's teeth were almost grinding into powder, but she could only pretend to be willing and took the medical reports with trembling fingers. I heard her mutter an unwilling, "It's fine." When our eyes met, she suddenly smiled and with surprise she asked, "How come you are here with Ethan to get married? Did you tell your parents about such an important matter? You can't let him take advantage of you for nothing." As she spoke, she put on a worried expression, looking like a good sister-in-law concerned about her sister's welfare. That was, of course, if we disregard what happened in my past life. I was disgusted, but I pretended to be surprised. Of course I told my parents. They agreed. Didn't they tell you about it? The smile on her face gradually froze. I knew she hated it when my parents didn't treat her like family. She had done a lot for the family over the years, but in the eyes of my feudal parents, she was a useless woman because she couldn't get pregnant, and was deliberately trying to cut off our family line. Therefore, they often gave Bianca a hard time. Seeing Bianca's expression fall, I regretfully shook my head. I told my parents a long time ago not to be so distant towards you. After all, you are part of our family. There is no need to widen the gap. Before I could finish, Bianca glared at me fiercely. She angrily pushed me, snatched the premarital report from my hand, tore it up and turned and left without looking back. I watched her figure become blurry, my eyes turning dark. Based on Bianca's personality, this matter would not end so easily. I wanted to see what kind of mess she could make. Bianca always boasted that she was a straightforward, tomboyish woman. In my past life, not only did she humiliate me in front of the entire family, but after I became pregnant, she took my child to my ex-boyfriend and asked him if the child looked like him. After that, my ex-boyfriend kept harassing me, and I was exhausted from dealing with it. When everything was finally resolved, my husband and I found out that our child had a health issue and was unexpectedly diagnosed with leukemia at the hospital. My husband and I ran around everywhere looking for a compatible bone marrow donor, but she told my child that we didn't want him, causing him to develop acute pneumonia from crying for a long time, and he passed away that night. My husband and I were also killed in a car accident on our way back. Thinking of everything in my past life, I suddenly did not want to open the door in front of me. Just like I thought, when Bianca went home, she added fuel to the fire, saying that I was cursing my brother for being impotent and unable to have children. As soon as my mother heard this, she exploded and immediately called me to come back. So when I opened the door, what I heard was Bianca wailing on the sofa. "I've been slaving for your family all these years, and yet you allow Clara to talk to me like this. Dominic, Sue, are we even going to continue this marriage?" My brother kicked over the coffee table in front of him in frustration, pointed at Bianca, who was crying with her face swollen, and said, "Didn't Mom tell Clara to come back? If you have a score to settle, go find her." My father saw me at a glance. He angrily stepped over the messy living room and dragged me by the hair in front of Bianca. My father frowned and said, "If you haven't gotten rid of your anger, then hit Clara. Don't keep saying things about not having children. You can't just say those things randomly." My scalp was pulled taut. When my knees hit the glass shards, I couldn't help but hiss. But I was kicked by my brother. I knew this jinx brought nothing but trouble when she came back. "If you delay me from having a son, you'll see what I'll do to you." I lowered my eyes and looked at the glass shards stuck in my palm. I struggled to get up from the ground under the angry gaze of my brother, then grabbed a fruit tray and rushed towards Bianca. "Is your rectum and trachea connected the wrong way? You just spew crap with your mouth. You tell me how I bullied you. Don't keep acting like your parents just died." Bianca was stunned by the fruit tray. After a long while, she finally reached out to touch the blood that trickled down her cheek. My mother frantically tried to stop me. "If you didn't make your sister-in-law angry, would she be like this? Even if it's for the sake of our family line, what does it matter if you let her hit you a few times?" I stood in the living room, my sharp eyes sweeping over my guilty parents. After a long time, I suddenly let out a cold laugh, breaking the silence. "You tell me, how did I make her angry? Isn't she the one who slandered my boyfriend in the family group chat? If she didn't speak ill of my boyfriend, would I say those things about my brother in the group chat?" My brother instantly exploded like a cat with its tail stepped on. "What does your fight have to do with me?" I asked in a louder voice. What does my fight with my sister-in-law have to do with you? Can't you just shut up honestly? My brother was so scared by me that he shrank into the corner of the living room. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my rising emotions. I felt a surge of energy. You all believe what my sister-in-law says, but you don't even listen to what I say. Without asking any questions, you wanted me to kneel before my sister-in-law. Am I some lowly thing for you to humiliate me like that? My mother muttered. Isn't it for the sake of the family line? If my brother can't do it himself, don't even mention family line. I sneered, interrupting my mother. Upon hearing this, my brother's eyes widened, and he let out a roar as he pounced towards me, but my next words nailed him to the spot. Didn't my sister-in-law tell you? My brother has already lost his fertility. No way. Sister-in-law, you were even going to hide this from my brother? Are you planning to find another man and make my brother be a cuckold? As soon as I finished speaking, my brother kicked Bianca. His angry roar sounded in my ears. You slut. You dare to cuckold me. I'll beat you to death today. After being beaten by my brother, Bianca behaved herself for a long time. The preparation for Ethan and I's wedding also began in earnest. But recently my parents were acting strange. Under the guise of wanting the best for us, they changed our carefully planned scheme and insisted on covering our original Chinese-style wedding with white cloth. This led to a fierce argument. Bianca, who had come upon hearing the news, put on a bashful expression, covering her stomach and smiling sweetly. I still think Western-style weddings look best. Red and purple look so tacky. I suppressed my feelings of unease and retorted. Is it your wedding or my wedding? Why don't you be the bride? And we'll give you the entire venue. Unexpectedly, Bianca chuckled softly. Didn't Mom and Dad tell you? This venue was originally meant for me and your brother. We'll go through the whole process, and then you two can get married. It was as if I'd heard something utterly absurd. I couldn't help but dig into my ears. What did you just say? Bianca, with her head held high, repeated what she had just said again. I looked at my parents in disbelief, but my mother wasn't on my side at all. Your sister-in-law has recently found out that she's pregnant. I also promised your sister-in-law that we would hold a wedding if she got pregnant, but you also know our current financial situation. I quickly raised my hand to interrupt her. Just because the economic situation isn't good, does that mean that you can take away our wedding venue? Besides, my brother isn't able to have kids. How is it possible for my sister-in-law to get pregnant? My brother puffed out his chest proudly. Your sister-in-law said she didn't tell me because she was afraid I would feel inferior. And without my knowledge, she had me drink medication for a long time. I'm all better now. As he spoke, his eyes glanced lewdly at Ethan's lower body. It seems the medicine worked really well. Should I recommend it to my brother-in-law? There is no shame to admit these things, I understand. I pouted, stretching out my index finger and thumb. I understand. The strange tone instantly made my brother's face darken. But before he could speak, I looked at Bianca. You say the child in your stomach is my brother's. Do you dare to get an amniocentesis after a few months? I want to see whose child you are carrying. I stared at Bianca unblinkingly, not missing the flash of panic in her eyes. Go. I will go. I nodded in satisfaction, signaling the manager to take the wedding gown away. Since you want to take over our venue, I have no objections. Ethan and I will not come until your wedding, and please don't disturb our time as a couple. After saying this, I pulled Ethan and turned to leave. Bianca feigned concern, holding my hand. Don't throw a temper tantrum anymore. It's not like Mom and Dad have any choice. Why don't you sympathize with them? I smiled and patted her shoulder. Then, while she was looking smug, I pointed to the man behind her, who was being blocked by staff members, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. Sister-in-law, you didn't manage your time well. Your boyfriend has been waiting behind you for a long time. Bianca's boyfriend made a scene at the wedding. After saying a few harsh words to my sister-in-law, he turned and left, leaving Bianca dumbfounded. My brother grabbed her collar in a fury. Tell me whose child is in your stomach. Is it that little pretty boy's? You are actually cheating on me behind my back. Bianca was being choked, but she stubbornly retorted. I told you the child in my stomach is yours. Are you going to doubt me just because of a few words from that man? Seeing my brother's hand was tightening more and more, Bianca completely panicked. I said, we'll do an amniocentesis at the end of my pregnancy. Wouldn't we know if it was yours then? As she spoke, tears fell down Bianca's cheeks. My mother hesitated for a moment and still pulled my brother's hand. Why don't we wait a few days to check? Our family finally has a child. We can't have any problems at this time. Seeing the hesitation on my brother's face, my mother whispered, if you really feel uncomfortable, wait till after she has the child, then get a divorce and kick her out. Or you can find someone on the side. My son is so handsome, plenty of beautiful women will want to get into your bed. You don't need her. My brother thought for a moment, then nodded in compromise. Bianca coughed hard, clutching her tear-streaked neck. Her round eyes were covered in mist, making her look very pitiful. Finally, she reached out her pale fingers to grab my brother's shirt. Dongchi, are we still going to have the wedding? My brother threw her hand away in disgust. He picked up a box of tissues on the table and stormed out. Ethan and I looked at each other and we both saw the excitement in each other's eyes. At the moment that my brother pushed the door open and left, we slipped into the utility room. When we came out again, only my sister-in-law was in the large hall. Upon seeing me, Bianca immediately stood up with a fierce look on her face. What are you doing back here now? Did you come to watch me make a fool of myself? Well, too bad, the child in my stomach is your brother's. I tilted my head, pretending to be naive. Since the child in your stomach is my brother's, why did that man say the child is his and even hit you in front of my brother? Bianca's face instantly changed. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. How would I know that? Maybe he mistook me for his ex-girlfriend. After all, I'm so beautiful. My smile hadn't fully reached my eyes when my phone abruptly rang. I answered the call. The man who was cursing Bianca earlier said cheerfully, "Boss, everything is done. Be sure to come to me if you need this sort of thing next time. Professional extra boyfriend for hire. Cheap and good." I brushed him off before ending the call. I looked up. Bianca was staring at me, her eyes like she wanted to burn me alive. She said through gritted teeth, "Clara." Despite Bianca's repeated assurances to Dominic that she hadn't cheated, after what happened, Dominic no longer trusted her. My parents were also not as doting on her as they were when she had just gotten pregnant. Instead, they made her get up before dawn to work, not only handling all 3 meals but also taking care of all the housework. Logically, she should have been used to this kind of life, but she was now pregnant and physically weak. Such high-intensity work was too much for her. But my parents didn't listen to any of her explanations. Over time, Bianca's resentment grew. This resentment reached its peak when Dominic brought someone home. I was rushing home, but I didn't expect to see Bianca trembling with anger in the living room and Dominic with his arm around a woman who also had a large belly. I've been working like a horse for your family for so many years. I've at least worked hard. And yet you bring home your mistress while I'm pregnant and expect me to take care of her. Bianca's piercing voice was like nails scratching across a chopping board, hurting my ears. Dominic protectively covered the woman's ears. Nana is in her late pregnancy. I'm afraid there might be danger if she lives outside. Can't you please stop being so unreasonable? Bianca let out a ha sound, pointing at her nose in disbelief. What do you mean I'm being unreasonable? There's never been a situation where the wife has to take care of the mistress, let alone the wife who is pregnant. Dominic looked at Bianca with disdain. Who knows whose child is even in your belly? If it isn't mine, I would have lost out, so I have to consider my own interests. Bianca staggered from anger. My mother chimed in at this point, trying to convince Bianca. All men are like that. You need to think about our family's future. Even though Dominic has a woman outside, he only married you, right? Then she turned to look at me. Clara, stop watching the show. Come and persuade your sister-in-law. Looking at Bianca's overflowing sense of grievance, I suddenly burst out laughing. What my brother said is actually not wrong. You don't know whose child is in your belly yet, so we can't just let the Sue family have no descendants. Bianca fell to her knees and cried. You all have no other skill than bullying me. I will have the child and then we will divorce. Don't even think of seeing the child. This threat was useless as my mother was smiling broadly, touching the mistress' belly, and urging my father to quickly clear out Dominic and Bianca's room, preparing to give the room to Dominic and his mistress. Bianca, with her big belly, blocked the door of the room. "It's fine you brought her in, but why should she sleep in the same room as my husband?" My father had run out of patience. He slapped Bianca to the ground. "Because this house was bought by me, and because you were a second-hand when you married my son. Is that okay?" Bianca sat on the ground covering her face. She stared blankly as my parents threw all her things out. Looking down, she suddenly caught a glimpse of the smile on my lips. She suddenly went crazy, lunging at me and grabbing my clothes, shouting angrily, "Why are you laughing? It's all your fault that I ended up like this. You the culprit, what's there to laugh about?" My parents, who were discussing where to eat that evening, paused and turned to look at the long-forgotten Bianca and me. "Clara, you said you had something important to tell me. What is it?" I didn't look at the frantic Bianca. I took the hospital's ultrasound scan from my purse and handed it to my mother, who was looking surprised. "I am 3 months pregnant. Due to financial issues, Ethan and I have decided to take back the house that belongs to me." As my mother watched me in disbelief, I smiled sweetly. "Why don't you discuss when you're going to move out?" Everyone in the living room seemed to have been frozen. Even my mother took a while to react and asked with a trembling voice, "What do you mean by having us move out? We have always lived in this house. Why should we be the ones moving out?" I reluctantly took out the property certificate that I had brought. I opened the book in front of everyone. "So what if you have lived here? The owner on the property certificate is my name. I bought this house with all my money. If you don't leave, who will?" Dominic became agitated and hopped from one foot to the other. "Mom and Dad are old. How can they bear your torment? Is it Mom and Dad who cannot bear the torment, or is it you?" My outspokenness completely enraged my brother. He released his lover's hand and walked toward me with big strides. The slap landed just beside my ear but didn't hit my face. I slightly tilted my head, only to see that the mistress Dominic had brought with him was holding onto Dominic's collar, her eyes red. As she asked in a hoarse voice, "Didn't you say the house was yours? Why is your sister's name written on the property certificate?" Dominic's face froze. "Clara and I are family. Her things are mine, right? Besides, she will get married sooner or later. Then these houses and cars will all be ours." Dominic was lost in his fantasies, completely oblivious to the deathly paleness on Bianca's face behind him. My eyes darted around and I chuckled. "Well, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is still mine. I bought this house with a loan, and Mom and Dad took it without my consent. When did it become yours?" Dominic looked at me with gritted teeth, his eyebrows full of humiliated resentment. Seeing this, my mother took his hand with heartache and looked at me with strong blame in her eyes. "Your brother is weak and cannot work. Outsiders don't know that, but shouldn't you know? He finally settled down and now you want to take the house away." My mother clutched at her chest in anguish. "What kind of a heart do you have?" I blatantly rolled my eyes, and amidst my parents' heavy breathing, spread my hands. "What does his weakness have to do with me? Did he crawl out of my stomach?" Hearing this, my mother almost fainted. Luckily, my father held her up. "He is your own brother. Why can't you help him? When you get married, the house and the car will still be ours, won't they?" I covered my mouth and pretended to be surprised. "The house and the car? Are you referring to the 3 cars parked downstairs and the house you're living in?" My parents looked at each other and then nodded. But then a huge smile bloomed on my face. "The 3 cars downstairs have already been sold to other people, and this house has also been booked by a buyer." I put on a troubled expression. "I only came to inform you today, but I didn't expect you to be so possessive of other people's things and refuse to leave." Dominic was so angry that he wanted to hit me, but the next second his whole body froze on the spot. I looked helplessly at the police behind me. "Sorry for the trouble. I thought I could handle this matter myself. It turns out, they were trespassing and stealing my property." Behind me, my parents' faces changed. After selling the house, Dominic was released from the detention center. He and my parents repeatedly went to our company to make a scene, sitting on the ground and saying that I was disregarding family ties, and that I had taken away the house that should have belonged to them. Even Bianca, who had been betrayed by my brother, came over with her big belly, holding my hand and pleading with me to give my parents and brother a chance and not sell the house. On the surface she looked pitiful, but I knew her true snake-like nature. Bianca stood up proudly, her big belly evident. I knew you were a love brain, but I didn't expect you to be so love brain that you are willing to fight with your parents for a man. I touched my slightly bulging pregnant belly, my face dark and silent. As if she had found something to grab onto, Bianca continued, I'm used to speaking bluntly, don't take it to heart. If you feel itchy, just slap yourself with a slipper. A strong independent woman shouldn't always rely on a man, right? I looked at her belly and smiled. I didn't know my brother had a sex change operation. My brother's face twisted in anger. I knew what kind of people my parents and my brother and sister-in-law were. To avoid impacting the company's reputation, I had no choice but to resign at this time. So I was extremely frustrated. Coming here to flaunt your big belly. Aren't you afraid that I'll accidentally push you down the stairs and that your child will be lost? Unexpectedly, Bianca didn't react with the pain I was expecting. Instead, she slowly curled up the corner of her lips, saying complacently, If you dare to harm my child, do you believe my parents will beat you to death? Confused, I looked at her. What does my parents beating me to death have to do with you? Besides, you're not the only one who is pregnant. Bianca chuckled and then slowly slid down, clutching her belly. Before I could react, my mother's scream burst in my ears, and a fierce slap landed on my face. You devil, what have you done to your sister? My mother, who had been treating Bianca like trash only days ago, now held Bianca's hand with heartache, gently asking her what part of her body was hurting. Bianca looked at me, her eyes full of tears. I was just trying to persuade you not to be so selfish, to think about your brother and parents. Why did you say such hurtful things to me? I remained silent, ready to hear what she would say next. My mother pointed at my nose and cursed. Your sister-in-law finally got pregnant. She's the only descendant of the Sioux family. What if you make her and her child suffer? In the quiet hall I suddenly laughed. Isn't there still the mistress that my brother is keeping? Isn't her child a child too? Our Sioux family doesn't just rely on my sister-in-law to have kids. I didn't miss the flash of gloom in my brother's eyes. Come to think of it, it wasn't surprising. When I came home asking for the house, my brother's mistress' expression was a bit off, and later on, she had a huge argument with my brother. Judging by how my brother looked, it was likely that the woman had lost the baby. My mother's face turned green and then purple. She still strained her neck and said, What nonsense are you talking about? Your sister-in-law is your brother's lawfully wedded wife. Of course, the children of our Sioux family will be born from your sister-in-law. I pretended to be disgusted, sticking out my tongue. You sure can talk better than you can sing. Weren't you the one who instigated my brother to find a mistress? Weren't you the one who told me not to be too nice to my sister-in-law? Weren't you the one who brought the mistress back and had my sister-in-law take care of her? As soon as these words came out, Bianca's face completely darkened. She let go of the hand that was covering her belly. Is what Clara said true? The idea to bring that slut back was yours. My mother stuttered, unable to say a word. Bianca has always been sharp. Could she not understand what my mother's expression meant? She immediately flew into a rage. Dominic Sue, you touch your own conscience. How many days have I been working like a horse for this family? Yet you suddenly let your mother treat me like this. My brother, who was embarrassed by the whispers around him, covered her mouth and roared. Are you afraid that others won't know our family's scandals? Can't we talk about these things when we get home? Seeing that my brother was still trying to shirk his responsibilities, Bianca exploded. You know this is a scandal, yet you can embrace your mistress and parade her before me? I'm still carrying your child. My brother dismissed her with contempt. Who knows whose child is in your belly? Of course I would raise it if it were our Sioux family's. But if it isn't, I will have to keep some backup plan. Bianca staggered with anger. I found it funny. I pinched my nose and said with a nasal tone, Sister-in-law, I'm going to say a few blunt words. Don't take it to heart. Bianca instantly looked at me angrily. I mimicked her tone. You're already married to my brother, so why are you still being picky? Not everyone has such good luck to marry into our family. And even less people are so lucky to take care of my brother's mistress. My brother was happy when he heard my first sentence, but his face darkened when I spoke the last words. After mocking Bianca, I raised my head amidst my colleagues' surprised gazes, looked at my brother who was already itching to hit me, and slowly raised my middle finger. The next second my roar was deafening. "It's your fault that my sister-in-law is cuckolding you. Go die, you impotent man." Bianca collapsed to the ground like a boneless creature. She knew once I said these words, she could never explain where the child came from. Bianca, who had finally returned to her place in the clouds, suddenly fell into the mud. The intense contrast made her burst into tears, and her cries echoed throughout the rented apartment. When the neighbors knocked on the door, I had just arrived at the front of the apartment and knocked on the door. Bianca's baby was already 8 months along. When she went for a checkup a few days ago, the doctor said the child was not healthy, but we don't know exactly what is wrong. I watched Bianca stuffing large pieces of meat into her mouth while she cried. My mother muttered under her breath, "Pregnant and yet she can still eat so much. You'd think we've married a trash can." I smelled the nauseating odor of fish and meat in the room. I suppressed my physical discomfort and walked into the cramped room. When she saw me, Bianca stopped her gluttonous actions. She stared at me, her eyes suddenly turning red. "Clara, how dare you come and see me?" I hugged my pregnant belly and chuckled lightly. "Why wouldn't I dare to come and see you?" She used the table for support as she stood up. It was then that I saw her swollen belly, which was almost transparent. A surge of surprise swept through me. It wasn't strange for an 8-month-old pregnancy to look big, but Bianca's belly was much too big. It was like 2 ripe watermelons stacked together, stretching her skin to its limits. Seeing me frown as I looked at her belly, Bianca suddenly pounced at me like a madwoman. "Why are you looking at my belly? Do you also think I'm a monster? Do you also think the child in my belly is not healthy?" I didn't say anything, but my silence spoke volumes. Out of sympathy for Bianca, who was also pregnant, I tried to advise her. "Why don't you go to the hospital and check your belly? It's very unusual for an 8-month fetus to grow this big. I'm afraid it will cause something to happen to your body." Before I could finish, my brow bone suddenly experienced a sharp pain. I touched my throbbing brow bone slowly. Obvious blood flowed from my forehead. I took a deep breath. The gaze that I had towards Bianca was filled with cruelty. "I was being nice and telling you all this. You don't even know how to appreciate it. When something happens to you or your child, don't come and find me. Remember, it's all your own fault." Bianca roared. "Shut up. My child is perfectly healthy in my belly. How could anything happen to him? You are a venomous woman. You can't stand to see me doing well." My mother finally lost her patience. "You have been crying non-stop since morning. Now that Clara has arrived, you are acting crazy. Don't blame me if I send you to a mental hospital." Normally, Bianca would calm down after my mother said this, but this time she was unusually firm. "Go ahead and send me there. Let's see if I will lose the baby or divorce Dominic, that good for nothing." Clang! The sound of a broken cup rang behind me. My mother's scream and my brother's roar completely enraged Bianca. She sat on the chair and laughed out loud, her whole demeanor deranged as if she was not in her right mind. In a daze, I seemed to hear the sound of trickling water. In a split second, I turned to look at Bianca. She was still sitting on the ground laughing maniacally, but a large amount of amniotic fluid was pouring from her body, making her look incredibly disheveled. My mother exclaimed, but the first thing she thought was not about sending Bianca to the hospital. "You damn thing, you have soiled the sofa. We won't get our deposit back. Are you going to pay for the rent? Call an ambulance." Faintly seeing the red streaks of blood in the amniotic fluid, I gathered all my strength and roared at my dazed father and brother. "She's about to give birth. Call an ambulance quickly." Bianca gave birth to a meatball. A meatball with no head and no face, with no hands or feet. When we first saw the child, we all gasped, and my mother even collapsed on the floor and cried, "Why did you swap my grandson? Give me back my grandson." No one paid attention to her crying, until Bianca slowly woke up from her coma, tugging at my mother and asking where the child was. Did my mother truly erupt? "I knew you were trash. Otherwise, how could my grandson have turned into that?" Give me back my grandson. Bianca, who had just woken up, was beaten until she was bleeding. She knelt on the ground begging me to let her see the child. Helpless, I dragged my heavy body and stopped the nurses, begging them to let my sister-in-law see her child. But unexpectedly, Bianca fainted when she saw the child. When she woke up again, her whole mind was in a haze. She didn't even care when my mother yelled at her, and she spent her whole day hugging her pillow and singing lullabies. My mother had reached the end of her patience and called her crazy. She also said that her children had been killed by her. Bianca let out a scream and lunged to cover my mother's mouth. The two of them started tearing at each other in the hospital ward. I watched coldly from the side, and then quietly hid in the corner. A cold glint flashed. "What are you doing?" The yelling instantly vanished. I saw Bianca, wearing a blue and white striped patient gown, holding a fruit knife in her hand, desperately stabbing the still-living Dominic. Then she got up and went after my father. My father didn't react to what had just happened and was stabbed in the chest by Bianca. He fell to the ground. Bianca was trembling all over, muttering, "Not a monster." Her dark eyes rolled around a few times and finally fixed on me, who was hiding in the corner with a big belly. At that moment, my heart jumped into my throat. The fruit knife came piercing towards me. The next second, the locked door was kicked open violently. The police did not hesitate to take down Bianca. The fruit knife fell from her hand and landed by my feet. Looking at Bianca being taken away, I finally couldn't hold back anymore. Tears flowed from my eyes. My husband, Ethan, wrapped his arms around me, his deep voice sounding in my ear. "I'm sorry, Clara, I'm late. It's all over. We are not afraid anymore, right? We are not afraid anymore." In that moment, the suffocation that I often felt in my chest since my rebirth completely disappeared.